Breaking news update as President have arrived in Colorado to tour the devastation from the Marshall Fire. We're getting our first live pictures of the president now on the ground touring some of the devastation in Louisville.
Let's take a look. This, we believe, the 1100 block of Enclave Circle there in Louisville. It's just a couple miles north of 36 there if you got off at McCaslin, not far from McCaslin there. You can see the president talking to what looks like a Louisville firefighter. There's the First Lady shaking his hand, other dignitaries, and Sheriff Joe Pelley there on scene there too as they tour all of this devastation. We did just get word from Boulder Valley School District that what's going on with the president is impacting traffic in terms of buses. They're saying that President Biden visiting the Marshall Fire burn area, families that have been impacted this afternoon, given the timing of the visit and the routes he will likely take this afternoon, we're expecting a significant impact to traffic and our bus routes. So if you have a student in Boulder Valley schools, be aware that obviously the president and his motorcade will probably cause some slowdowns there.
Yeah, and sometimes they'll do a rolling motorcade where they'll move along the intersections that they have to block off as the president is moving, or they may be blocking off that stretch of road from Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport to the Louisville area entirely. So just depending on that. But I think the main message there, whether you have a kid at the Boulder Valley School District or you're just traveling home after the end of a workday or going to pick up your kids, you can expect some traffic impacts because of the presidential motorcade. Now, what you're looking at right now, the live picture right now, you see the damage from the Marshall Fire from a week and one day ago to this Louisville neighborhood. These are the kinds of images that we expected going into today as the president and the first lady tour some of that devastation from the ground. It is our understanding as the president took off on Marine One heading toward Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport, he was also potentially able to get an aerial view. Forgive us for the live picture right now. The camera crew there obviously having to move the camera just a little bit, and that may happen throughout our live coverage here.
Yeah, this is coming to us from the presidential press pool. They're the ones manning the camera right here. We have no control. We are getting press pool reports of what happened as the president arrived. We know that the First Lady, if you noticed in the background, changed into snow boots as they got off Air Force One. They were greeted by Governor Polis, Lieutenant Governor Primavera, the state Senate President, and also our local delegation here of U.S. Senators and U.S. Representatives, including Joe Neguse, who represents that area. We can see people here in the foreground. These are likely Secret Service agents as the president gets closer to the press right there. Again, he's taking this tour in the 1100 block of West Enclave Circle, one of many blocks impacted by this fire a week ago.
And we looked it up. This is about under a mile in distance from the Louisville Senior and Recreation Center. That is where the president is expected to travel to next, where he is expected to give remarks and meet with more victims from this devastating fire. And typically in these situations, you know, when you see the president meeting with certain individuals and shaking hands with victims, these are victims that are typically been vetted and then have already spoken to officials, and it's sort of pre-planned and giving them the opportunity to meet with the president and really get the president's ear about what the experience of losing their home and having to evacuate within minutes, get his ear and really share their story of what they dealt with and what their concerns are moving forward. That was something Governor Polis touched on. You know, part of this visit is to really emphasize to the president what the immediate needs are, and then also long-term needs as well, because it will be a very long road to recovery for these individuals and rebuilding.
It's striking as you look at that live image. As far as the eye can see, not a thing is standing, not a thing is intact, and that is so true of so many neighborhoods and so many cul-de-sacs and so many streets, both in Louisville and Superior. Our Matt Morrow is up there right now in Boulder County in the burn zone, and Matt, what he's seeing right now is what folks all over Boulder County have been seeing for 8 days now.
Absolutely. The president wanted to see this on the ground himself. That is why he is here just about a half mile or so from the Louisville Recreation and Senior Center, which is undamaged by the fire, as is the fire station, Louisville Fire Rescue 2 behind me. But you can see other homes in this neighborhood are. I talked with a couple of the families just a short time ago that are meeting with the president right now. They got the word about that yesterday afternoon. They had to take a COVID test, a rapid test today, and they're wearing those N95 masks. But they are excited to see the president in their neighborhood and to talk with him and to tell them what their needs are. I did just learn a short time ago that FEMA has already approved $269,000 in cash payments to people affected by this fire. Of course, there are going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars more for that. Congressman Joe Neguse on Air Force One today was talking with the president about more grants for the fire departments in this area as well. Those could be approved at any time. We know just less than a month ago, after the Kentucky disaster with the tornadoes, the president approved a declaration that allowed for 30 days that the federal government would cover all the costs associated with fighting the disaster itself, the recovery and the cleanup. We expect him to do the same here as well. There have been about 100 people here gathered outside of the Louisville Recreation and Senior Center today to see the president in his motorcade in the next half hour or 45 minutes as it heads this way. President Joe Biden, as he takes over the consoler-in-chief role here, he uses his empathy and the loss that he has dealt with in his personal life to really connect with people. And he wanted to make sure before he came here today that this was not going to stop any of the recovery that is going on in this area, even though it is just beginning now, 8 days after the fire. And I'll tell you, here at the Recreation Center today, despite the wind that is out here, and pretty decent weather overall for this time of year in Colorado, the operation has gone on pretty much as planned. People have still come up here to get bottled water, as a lot of folks in this area still need it. They've also gone inside to get donations and to register for help. So it has not been an inconvenience at all. The president has talked about this being what he calls a trip to show strength and resilience. The president initially wanted to wait a couple of weeks, potentially a month or two, to come here to Colorado to see the disaster, to see some of the rebuilding in progress. But because he was flying over the state here to go to Nevada for Senator Harry Reid's funeral, he felt it very important to go ahead and stop in this area, and that's what he's doing right now. He is on the ground just about a half mile away from here, talking with people. And the people in this area say this is all good news. The more that the federal government can take a look at the damage here, 1,084 homes burned to the ground, hundreds of others damaged, businesses damaged as well, the more that FEMA, they believe, is going to shell money this way. You see the president and the First Lady Jill Biden, who has often accompanied him on these trips to disaster areas there, again, just across the street, meeting with the families in this area, talking with them about what they have gone through in the last 8 days, and more so what they need from the state, the local, and the federal government as they move forward. Of course, money is going to be a lot of it. There's going to be federal assistance here to repair any of the federal and the state and local roads in this area that were damaged as well. So all of that is going to come in handy, and the people here in Superior and in Louisville are certainly glad to get it. Jeremy and Erica?
Matt, I couldn't help but notice the wind howling in the background there in your live shot a moment ago. It was certainly a reminder of what went on there 8 days ago, and I'm sure the folks around there are noticing that too. Not at all comparable, I'm sure, but definitely a reminder.
It certainly is, Jeremy, and the people out here have talked about that. They almost get a little gun shy, so to speak, when wind like this kicks up. Of course, as you mentioned, nothing like it was 8 days ago when that wind was sustained 60 to 70 miles an hour and basically hurricane-force wind gusts at over 100 miles per hour. I'll tell you, when the wind blows in a certain direction, you can smell the fire still in this area, and that is certainly a reminder, an unfortunate one for the people in this area as they come out here today. They're pushing more people across the street as we speak here at the Recreation Center as they get ready to see the president in this area. He'll come here, he'll talk with the volunteers that are here, he'll talk with other first responders, meet with more people who have been evacuated, and then talk about what the federal government's response to this is going to be. One thing the president said last month, as there was some talk about, there have been a lot of natural disasters, major fires all across the country. You two referenced the ones from California just a short time ago. The president does say FEMA is not running short of money. There are millions and millions of dollars available to people, and they're certainly going to need it here. We know those 1,084 homes that burned, just the home values in themselves, our data team has compiled records show that that is more than $1 billion loss. That's not to talk about people's personal property and so much more. And once again here, President Joe Biden, Sheriff Joe Pelley from Boulder County talking right there. Again, Sheriff Pelley has been a very important part of the work that was done to evacuate some 35,000 people when these fires burned. They didn't really have time or weren't able to fight the fires because of the sheer force of the wind, but what he, his staff, and other first responders in this area did was really nothing short of a miracle to get those 35,000 people out of their homes with very few casualties in this area. We see the president here and the first lady going up and talking with another family, and in the background there you see basically just the concrete foundation of homes, and we've seen these images for about 7 days now, yet it's still just incomprehensible that this happened here in Boulder County, and 1,000 homes burned in basically 6-8 hours, such a short period of time. Jeremy and Erica.
That's right, and we know that in Louisville itself, we know that at least 550 homes were destroyed. Of course, in total, there were about 1,084 homes destroyed, and that's not to say that that number couldn't go up. 7 businesses destroyed as well. Those could be commercial buildings that include smaller businesses within them. Matt, if you're still listening to me, I'd like to ask you what you think in terms of climate change. We talked about this earlier. The president does not shy away from sometimes mentioning climate change and the need for climate change reports and funding legislation that addresses climate change. Do you think that that's something that we'll hear from the president today, as we have heard him discuss that in previous trips that he's had following a natural disaster?
Eric, I have no doubt that he will mention that. Whether he focuses a lot on it, I'm not sure. But remember, his Build Back Better Act is still in Congress right now, and there are millions and millions of dollars in that act to fight climate change. So the president, while not making it a focus of this trip, will no doubt bring it up and talk about that. The people out here, obviously this is Boulder County. It's a liberal, a Democratic area. There's a lot of support for the president here. They would like to see money for that in the future, but there's very little that once this fire started, when it happened last week, that would have stopped it. There was work being done on more fire mitigation projects. That takes time. Clearing out forests, that takes time and money, all of that. But when it happens in this urban interface, it is a whole other world entirely, though we know it has been extremely, extremely dry out here in this area. So yes, the president will definitely talk about that. He'll talk about FEMA's response as well, the federal government's response, and them doing basically everything they can to help out Boulder County, Louisville, and Superior, and all the people out here as well. And again, they certainly are welcoming that support and all of that. There are about 200 people gathered just across Via Appia Way right here, waiting for the president to go ahead and see them. We can swing over and kind of show you those people as we look out here. Some have been waiting for a short time, others have been waiting for a few hours. And one thing that many of them have said is they thought they were going to get kicked out of this area, but the Secret Service, they're doing constant sweeps of this area with the law enforcement officers and their dogs as well, the working canines, but they have let people be here all this time. They're certainly welcome to have them here, and all of these people are gathering right across the street. This is just next to Louisville Fire Station 2, along with the recreation center here. It really is nothing short of a miracle that when you look around this area, you see the homes up on the hill there destroyed, half a mile away where the president is right now. That whole neighborhood destroyed and burned to the ground. This area, just fine. If you didn't look around in here, you wouldn't think that there was a fire in this area. And I think that's one of the most shocking things that we've seen in the last week in the destruction of this fire is there were a couple of neighborhoods, Sagamore, that was completely burned to the ground. But in other places, it was completely where Mother Nature decided that fire would go. There is President Joe Biden once again meeting with more people. It's at least a dozen families that he is talking with here. You can see his motorcade in the background right there. Plenty of Secret Service agents as well. Everybody masked up just to go ahead and stay safe, even being outside with Omicron surging here in Colorado and all across the country. But the president talking, learning, listening. He has made that a big point of his presidency, to be a listener and to hear what people have to say and to take that into account when he makes decisions at the federal level. And that is what he is doing right here. And he'll also be talking with Colorado Congressman Joe Neguse, Senators Michael Bennet and John Hickenlooper, who have had his ear for the last few hours on Air Force One, telling the president what they think Colorado needs. And again, that starts with money. Millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars. And we hope to speak with a few of those representatives a little bit later today to see how those conversations went. Jeremy and Erica.
And Matt, this comes as we learn the identity of one of the victims of this fire, one of the people whose remains were discovered days ago in the 5900 block of Marshall Road. Getting confirmation from the Boulder County Sheriff's Office this afternoon that they are, in fact, the remains of Robert Sharp, who was one of the missing persons from the Marshall fire. Again, Robert Sharp has now been identified as one of 2 missing people after the fire. His remains discovered in the 5900 block of Marshall Road days ago. And the other headline, again, that we learned just hours ago, last night really, was that this fire is even bigger than we expected in terms of overall damage. Already the most destructive fire in Colorado history in terms of property loss, but we now know the number, which we thought was just below 1,000, is now pushing 1,100 buildings, homes destroyed, 1,084 of them.
And also several more, dozens more damaged as well, and 7 businesses destroyed as well, 30 businesses also suffering some damage. I wanted to see if, Matt, if you can still hear me, I wanted to ask you about the individuals who have been lining up to see the president. Are these individuals who will be allowed inside of the recreation center there in Louisville to listen to the president's remarks, or are these just individuals who wanted to catch a glimpse of the president as he visited their community during such a trying time?
Most of the people outside right here are people who just wanted to catch a glimpse of the president as he comes to Boulder County during this trying time. There are many others who are already inside of the Recreation and Senior Center who will be able to meet the president there, talk with him in person, and listen to the speech that he is set to make here in the next hour or so. Some of the people out here, their homes are just fine, thankfully. They were able to go ahead and escape this fire okay, but there are many others out here whose homes were destroyed by the Marshall fire and did an awful lot of damage to it. And we see the president there walking once again, I believe, with Sheriff Joe Pelley and others, and the First Lady Jill Biden, as they're going through this neighborhood and seeing house after house, car after car burned, and just ash and rubble that is left from the Marshall fire. And there are parts up here that you see that literally look like a war zone, that we never thought we would see this, certainly never hoped we would in Colorado, much less in this urban area about a half mile off of a major U.S. highway. And the president right here talking with more families. It looks like a child. I believe it's hard to see who's exactly behind him, but bottom line is it is more and more people affected by the fire. You see Congressman Joe Neguse, Senator John Hickenlooper, and Michael Bennet there in the foreground of that picture as well. We know Joe Neguse has been here quite a bit since the fire started. Senator Michael Bennet has been here a couple days as well. I believe this is the first time that Senator Hickenlooper has been on the ground in this fire area. There's Governor Jared Polis, and they are all listening to these people as well to see what the state response can do, and again, how they can lean on the federal government. When you talk about Senator John Hickenlooper, who is here, he was governor for Colorado for 8 years, including back in 2013. And I know, Jeremy, you'll certainly remember this. It was one of the worst years ever for natural disasters here in Colorado. You had the floods that affected this area and really all of the Front Range, destroying more than 2,000 homes. You also had the Black Forest fire, the most destructive wildfire in Colorado's history up until this one that destroyed another 500 homes. So he had learned a lot from disaster recovery and helping people from that. And he tells me he's going to use that to help with the recovery now, and going to push the federal government even more with personal experience from here in Colorado and what the state can do to rebuild stronger, rebuild better, and do it as quickly as possible. Jeremy and Erica.
Yeah, sadly, we do have plenty of experience when it comes to these natural disasters. Of course, a lot of parallels being drawn to what happened in Boulder County last week and that Black Forest fire that Matt mentioned a few years back. Hundreds of homes destroyed out there. Also Waldo Canyon, which was more of a suburban neighborhood-like setting, kind of like what we saw there in Superior and Louisville. Devastating in both places, but never had we quite seen what we've seen here in Boulder County in the last 8 days. And again, that is the most destructive fire in state history, with well over 1,000 homes burned. And
I just want to point out, during this presidential visit, there's a lot of logistics that goes into this. There are so many groups involved to actually make what you are seeing on the ground happen, and happening in a very orderly fashion so far. From what we've seen, they are on schedule so far, but that includes agencies like the Secret Service, the White House Advance Team, the White House Political Team, FEMA, and then all the officials that are involved on the ground, the offices of the congressmen who are there, the offices of the senators who are there. So there's a lot of logistics that goes into this. But part of this and what you're seeing, and we've already apologized about this, the picture, the live feed that you're seeing right now, it tends to move. We don't have control over it. This is one of the members of the White House press corps. And I say that to point out that this is part of the intention of the president visiting this disaster site, because with that, he is now putting the spotlight, the national spotlight, on the devastation and what victims and families are going through. So certainly keeping the attention and hopefully with that also keeping the support coming into Colorado for an extended period of time.
It seems like what the president and first lady are doing here is every few minutes they're brought to meet with a new victim from the fire. And again, there's no shortage of those. And we know from having experienced tragedy in our own lives to some degree, certainly not to the degree folks in Boulder County have this past week, but we know that it tends to help to talk about these things, yes. And that is exactly what these people are doing, and who more important to talk to about it than the leader of the free world. And they certainly have his ear at the moment, and certainly the first ladies too, as we look at this group of homeowners there from Boulder County speaking with the president, Congressman Neguse, the governor as well, and sort of laying out the play-by-play of what happened 8 days ago right there in Louisville.
Yeah, and I think Matt was the individual who mentioned this, but you know, it doesn't matter who you voted for on a day like today. There is something to be said to have the ear of the president and the first lady and the congressional delegation of Colorado, and listening to the experience that you've had over the last 8 days, and talk about what your family has lost, and talk about your needs for moving on and rebuilding and recovering. There's something very powerful about having the president's ear and being able to express that. So it's certainly part of the reason why the president is on the ground today touring the damage. And again, now you're looking at a different live picture, and this shows, according to Matt, these are individuals there in the Louisville neighborhood who may not even be able to see the president face to face, but wanted to catch a glimpse of the president visiting their neighborhood, as they've been challenged in ways that so many of us will never experience, losing everything from one moment to the next. It appears that they're cheering, and Matt, maybe you can chime in a little bit here. It seems like they were cheering. Maybe they're clapping for the Louisville firefighter truck that's passing by them. But kind of give us an update of what's happening there.
Now, they are cheering for that ambulance. This is Louisville Fire Rescue District 2, again, in the heart of the Marshall Fire. That ambulance left here about a half hour or so ago, just pulling back by. And people here, you can see there's a sign. I'm not sure you can see it, but on the front of the fire station that says, "Thank you, first responders." They are extremely thankful for the work of the first responders right here. And that round of applause that you just saw and you just heard was for that ambulance. That area is coming from the east. We expect President Joe Biden and his motorcade, along with the congressional delegation, to come from the west. They're just about a half-mile away from here across McCaslin right now, visiting with those families. And you talked about President Joe Biden listening. There is no doubt that he has made empathy and his sense of loss a part of his presidency, and in his ability to connect with people because of that, because of the own losses he has had in his own life with his first wife, his daughter, and his son Beau, who all passed away at extremely young ages. So listening and dealing with trauma and tragedy and loss is something that the president is very familiar with, and that is why he is eager to get on the ground and to talk with people who are experiencing that, whether it be in other parts of the country, and unfortunately today it is in our backyard right here in Colorado. Again, we do know that about $270,000 from FEMA in cash money is already being distributed to the people here. It may not be a lot in the big scope of things, but it's certainly a start. On top of that, there have been $30 million donated here through GoFundMe, through the Boulder Community Foundation and other areas, plus millions of dollars donated through the Red Cross, the United Way, including the fundraisers that we have had right here on Fox 31 as well. There's been an outpouring of support from people here in Boulder County, here in Colorado, and all across the country and the world to help everyone affected by these fires, those 1,084 families who are without a place to stay right now. Basically everything they had is now burned to the ground. The president right here, Congressman Joe Neguse, you see him as well, talking with more and more people. And what you see on the left, those are the images that happened the day after the fire, before the snow came down and put out those hot spots. And that is what the president is seeing as we speak. Cars burned out. And you talk with the people, and I talked with Judy and her family. They met with the president just a few minutes ago. They had just enough time to get their 3 dogs, Whippets, their son, and 2 cars out and make a run for it. They drove through thick, dark smoke. They said by the time they were able to get out of their house and get on the road, they could barely see in front of them if it weren't for the brake lights for other cars. And that was in a matter of minutes of just how quickly the fire and the smoke engulfed these homes. It flew and traveled miles in a very short period of time. And again, for some perspective, all of this damage was done in basically the scope of 6, 8, maybe 10 hours. It was just an unbelievable firestorm that happened here in hurricane force wind gusts. And that is what the president is seeing right now. He's taking a look at the damage from that. He has certainly seen a lot in his time as president, in the last year and 8 years as vice president, and decades before that as a U.S. senator. But he has never seen anything like this in such an urban area that happened in such a short period of time. And he is walking around right now, Governor Jared Polis. It looks like there may be some cars moving there. That could be potentially the presidential motorcade as we see it. He may be hopping in, whether it be an SUV or the Cadillac, his motorcade, the Beast, and they would be headed this way very quickly if that is what they do. And of course, the president has seen all those images we are seeing on the left side of the screen there of what the firefighters and everyone who's evacuated had to go through. And everyone is just at a loss for words because of it. Jeremy and Erica.
Yeah, and it looks like he's meeting with first responders now. There's a group of firefighters on the scene there in front of those burned out homes. This will be a chance for the president, a first chance for him to thank them for their role in trying to put this fire out 8 days ago. Of course, we know their heroics, and they were fighting a losing battle, really. We talked about on the air 8 days ago how we couldn't even know where to begin in a fire like this because literally everything was burning. But they found a way, and throughout the night, they put out pretty much every fire that they came across, and they did some really valiant work. These are people with the Louisville Fire Department in the foreground here with the president.
Yeah, and we watched live on the last Thursday night on December 30th as those firefighters suddenly started to appear just as soon as those winds started to come down just a little bit, and they found that opportunity to really start attacking that fire. You saw them popping up. We had at least 6 live feeds that night, and they were everywhere, really trying to battle those flames and do what they could to save homes and properties. And really, when it comes to the law enforcement community as a whole and first responders as a whole, the effort they made that day to evacuate the number of people that they did. You have to remember, on that night, the entire town of Superior and Louisville were evacuated. That meant tens of thousands of people had to stop everything they were doing and leave town. And you may remember on that day, the logistics of that were extremely challenging, even having to implement lane reversals to allow traffic to start moving more efficiently at that time, because there were so many people trying to leave at once. So, you know, it's not surprising that the president is taking the time to really look at these first responders in the eye and thank them for their bravery and their courage and their efforts, not just on that night, but in the days that followed. Grueling work, I'm sure much longer than 12-hour days. These first responders have been challenged in ways that they probably have never been challenged before.
Especially when you consider, we learned in the days that followed that a lot of them lost their own homes too. You know, we learned that about police workers there and firefighters in Louisville and Superior. While they were out trying to put out this massive wildfire, their own property was being destroyed.
You know, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because to that, you know, you got to think about the families of these first responders too, because, you know, if that's dad who's out there fighting the fires, then it's up to mom to gather the kids, to gather the dog, and put everybody in the car and figure out what to do on your own. And so, you know, you have to commend not just the first responders, but their families as well, who obviously face incredible challenges that day and the days to come if they did, in fact, suffer some damage or if their home was destroyed. I do want to quickly mention, we do have essentially an itinerary of what the president is supposed to be doing today. Right now, 3:45 in the afternoon, we're coming up on the 4 o'clock hour. So far, they do appear to be on schedule. So, you know, you have to think about sort of the traffic impacts in the immediate area that may be happening right around rush hour.
Looks like a firefighter just gave the president a challenge coin, is what they're they're called. They're
Yeah.
popular with first responders and military members. They typically identify the outfit you work for. In the military, it's whatever unit you're part of. If you're a first responder, then it's a representative of your agency. It has your logo typically and perhaps a slogan, and so it looks like that firefighter just gave President Biden one of those challenge coins. I'm sure he has a big collection of
Yeah.
those, and this one will be added to it. For those just joining us again, this is live coverage of the president as he makes a stop in Boulder County right now. He's visiting the town of Louisville, where hundreds of homes were destroyed 8 days ago in the massive Marshall Fire. He plans to be on the ground here for a short time longer here still, meeting with residents there. As you can see, they have gathered by the hundreds in this Louisville neighborhood to take in the site of the presidential visit and also to meet with them if he can, so that they can tell him their stories firsthand.
And, you know, we've been talking about the tremendous loss that this community has suffered. And one of the big breaking headlines that we have learned just this afternoon, the remains of one individual who was lost in this fire have been identified. That was Robert Sharp. You may remember just a couple of days ago, we learned from investigators they were able to find the remains of an individual. 2 people were missing. Robert Sharp, was unfortunately one of them. We know of one other individual who was also missing. We've actually been in contact with that family, communicating with them day in and day out to see if they have received any updates. At last check, which was last night, they had not received a word. But of course, you know, unfortunately, this was a deadly fire. And we've also, you know, heard about some first responders who may have been injured as well. And so, you know, when you talk about the toll that this has taken on the community, there are certainly 2 families who really did lose a loved one here and so are going through that devastation. And we've also heard from several families, unfortunately, who lost pets in this, who, you know, many families, I'm sure our viewers can relate. They're like family members for so many of us. And so we unfortunately have learned about that loss as well. So, you know, the role that the First Lady and the President are playing right now can be so crucial to some of these victims really potentially feeling a big sense of comfort and potentially hope for the days that lie ahead, seeing that they do have the backing of their federal government right now.
Regardless of your situation, you
Yeah.
want to think that Washington is paying attention, right?
For
and
sure.
so here they have some firsthand evidence that at least for this moment, Washington is paying attention. And we do know that just hours after the fire, President Biden spoke with Governor Polis, again, within 24 hours of the fire. And then less than a week ago, approved federal disaster declaration for Boulder County there. That makes federal money available to families and businesses. It can pay for temporary housing and home repairs and can provide low-cost loans to cover uninsured property and create federal funds to state and local governments to pay for fighting the fires and assessing the damage and the cleanup, which is going to be extensive. So the president did that January 1st, less than a week ago, and really got the wheels in motion
Yeah.
as this cleanup effort begins.
And we learned just yesterday, so these are the numbers as of yesterday, so just 6 days after that declaration was declared, that disaster declaration was declared, 1,300 people had already registered with FEMA. Again, that was as of Thursday. That number may be even higher right now. Right now, live picture right now, again, of the First Lady embracing one of the victims of that fire, offering some comfort to these individuals. But it really just goes to show that people are paying attention and they are using the resources available to them right now. And I mean, and they need it. They need it. There's so much loss here. One of the tweets that I remember vividly from Thursday night was a CU Boulder football coach who learned he had lost his home and all of his possessions. And he put it so starkly, how do we start over again? That was the question he posed. Where do I begin to start over again? And that's what so many of these families are dealing with today.
Matt, Matt Morrow joining us live once again from Louisville here. Matt, what do we know about the president's timeline after he meets with these residents right here?
After he meets with the people, again, he's going to drive in his motorcade just about a half mile to the Louisville Senior and Recreation Center here and is going to spend about another 30 minutes, 45 minutes on the ground here, talking with more people who have been affected by the fire, dozens of volunteers who are helping everyone, the thousands of people affected. And then also he is set to make a speech and address us here in Colorado and address the nation as well and talk about the fires and the federal response to that. And it'll be about 6:15 that he will leave here, head back to the Broomfield Metropolitan Airport, hop aboard Marine One, fly with the Osprey Escort back to DIA and board Air Force One, and then spend the night in Nevada as he gets ready for Senator Harry Reid's funeral tomorrow. You see him here meeting with more people, talking. One of the things that has struck me out here today, out here last week as the fires happened, and the day after is the resiliency, the strength, and just the sheer positive attitude of people despite going through something so traumatic that most of us could never imagine dealing with. They've lost everything, just able to leave with the clothes on their back in many cases, their pets, get in the car and go. They are so optimistic and so positive, and they tell me, yes, they do have some down moments. There are dark times, but it is the optimism, and they see the community coming together, and they see people like the president here, the governor, and many others as well. And this is what is driving them to keep going, knowing that there certainly are better days ahead, and they are just happy to have their lives and to have their health, and that they know they will rebuild, and they know that at some point life will get better once again. It is that attitude. It's people here in Colorado time and time again after tragedies, natural disasters, and more, and their resiliency that just amazes all of us. We see again the president here meeting with more people, patting someone on the shoulder right there and talking with them. And we talk about that idea of, you know, it seems that the people whose homes burned down here are doing far more talking than the president is. He's doing the listening, giving them a few good words of advice, that pat on the shoulder, just the human touch like that from the commander of the free world can make a huge difference on people. The ones that I spoke with earlier today who were getting ready for the president's visit were excited about it. They were thinking about what they were going to say to him, and talk with them about everything they lost, talk about those few harrowing moments as they rushed to evacuate this area in a urban firestorm and a thick cloud of smoke, and then what life has been like since then and what they are hoping for in the future as they begin the process of cleaning up. And at some point here in the future, whether it be near or not, they will start the delicate process of rebuilding. And many of them, of course, want to do it in this area. This is home for them. They love Boulder County, Louisville, and Superior, and this is where they want to stay. They don't want to leave this area. I'd like to talk with one of the couples who the president spoke with just a few minutes ago, and they're going to stay with some family friends a short drive away from here, but they can't wait to get back in this area. It has been just the outpouring of support that is giving them a place to stay while they go ahead and do this. Many others are staying in motels and hotels all across this area, and not only are they trying to get their lives back together, get documents, file insurance claims, work with FEMA, and so much more. They also have to worry about their jobs and their paychecks as well. So there certainly is a lot going on. They are grateful for the support, for the attention of the president, but they know that the help they need certainly doesn't end today. It's going to go on for days, weeks, months, and probably even years until they're able to build back in this neighborhood. And once again, here the president in the Enclave area. It's just north of US 36 and just off of McCaslin Boulevard, where hundreds of homes in Louisville have been burned. Looks like pretty much everything in this neighborhood has. And you see Sheriff Joe Pelley there and more, certainly giving people their distance, and people just enjoying this moment. It's kind of a way to escape from everything they have been through in the last 8 days. Jeremy and Erica.